we've done is brought in a lot of AI into our clinical trials. It's been a lot of fun there because it turns out, when you hook up people with a bunch of sensors and you plug it into AI, you can discover some really amazing things and some great patterns. So even though we're not there yet for personalized medicine and actually what patients get in the end, we're starting to get there with clinical trials.
Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. Our broadcast today comes from our most recent Metis Strategy Digital Symposium. The topic of this conversation is emerging AI opportunities in pharmaceuticals and healthcare. In this panel, I speak with Diogo Rao, the Chief Information and Digital Officer of Eli Lilly, Cindy Hoots, the Chief Digital Officer and Chief Information Officer of AstraZeneca, and Greg Meyers, the Chief Digital and Technology Officer of Bristol Myers Squibb. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I'm so excited for the next panel and bringing our next panelists to the stage. This has been a topic that I've been particularly interested in covering. There are certain industries that are very knowledge-centric. Few of them that are as knowledge-centric as pharma. And as a result of that, some of the greatest innovations have been spurred out of this industry. And literally lives can be positively impacted and disease may be eradicated based upon the work that our next three panelists are undertaking. I'm so excited to speak with three executives who I greatly admire, beginning with Cindy Hoots, who's the Chief Digital Officer and Chief Information Officer of AstraZeneca, a role she's held for nearly 4.5 years. She's also a board member of Zoom. Greg Meyers, the Chief Digital and Technology Officer of Bristol Myers Squibb. He's been in role for nearly 2.5 years and is a past CIO at Syngenta Group and Motorola Solutions. And finally, Diogo Rao, the CIO and CDO, Chief Digital Officer of Eli Lilly. I should mention the 9th highest market cap company in the US, and along with Berkshire Hathaway, one of only 2 in the top 10 that are not pure technology companies. He's a former executive at one of the other ones, Apple. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
It's a great pleasure. Well, Greg, I'd love to start with you, if I may. You were one of the first tech and digital executives I reached out to after the introduction of ChatGPT and Gen AI as an extension, at least in sort of more popular circles, and was really fascinated by some of the work that you were doing even in the early stages, personally, getting a lot of grit under your fingernails, figuratively speaking. And you could do so because of the foundational work the company had undertaken to integrate AI into your operations. I wonder if you could take a moment and talk a bit about some of the substance of this work and why it was essential.
Yeah, I think it probably starts with data. I think to be good at AI, you have to be great at data. And I think it's always a work in process for any big company, but we really needed to make sure that if we wanted tools and algorithms to be able to process incoming data, we needed to make sure that it was readily accessible. No different than it would be for just human beings using BI tools or something. So a lot of foundational work had to go on to make sure that we're catalog, storing, deduplicating, and making available the underlying data that's there. And that's a combination of structured data, like tabular data coming out of systems, but also a lot of the unstructured data. We're pretty lucky in the sense that really most of the documents in the company tend to be in the same repository. And so from a generative AI perspective, I think the first use case that probably everybody looked at, including us, was how these tools could perform to sort of replace typical keyword searching inside documents, right? Being able to take maybe 80 or 100,000 documents that are in our industry pretty highly technical, and being able to ask straightforward questions that is in a document somewhere, but sort of the current workflow is you need to find someone who knows where the document is, that has permission to view the document, and then they have to go review it, and then they provide an answer. And so for us, being able to unleash these tools by sort of vectorizing all of the documents that we had, gave us a really good head start in being able to see how these tools would perform in basic things like in document Q&A. And needless to say, it was really very impressive.
Very, very interesting. Appreciate that background. So important that we think about these foundational layers as important foundations to lay in order to set a pathway towards success in this area. Speaking of which, Cindy Hoots, when you joined AstraZeneca, the company was starting its journey of growth through innovation. That's the name of a program there. And innovation would require you to break down silos and ensure systems, processes, and data were interoperable and develop new ways of working. Can you talk a bit about the foundational elements you enacted to be able to take advantage of advances in artificial intelligence?
Yeah, so I really agree with what Greg just talked about in terms of some of the foundations. I think to maybe add to that, for me, it was coming in and really looking at the whole enterprise architect, kind of, approach and thinking about how do we architect for the future and moving from a number of disparate systems to more of a platform approach. And over the last 4 years, we've taken out about 1,600 applications and simplified, the technical estate. And then that allows you to get to the data elements that Greg was just talking about around how do you, be able to find the data, make it interoperable, make it accessible, et cetera. So that was a big part of that foundation. And then we also looked at things like how do you make sure from an AI ethics perspective that you've got the right governance, the right data governance in place. We had started the AI journey was really at the high end around data scientists and all of that. But then we were looking at how could we start to get to citizen, kind of data scientists and tools like Data IQ and others that allowed you to kind of start to make data science more readily accessible. And I think with generative AI, what we've seen is this complete democratization of people being able to use AI. And whether you're 8 or you're 80, you can interact with these, kind of large language models. And so I think putting that in place was really important. And then from the people side, I think we were at a point where we were really developing deep expertise in each of the silos, whether that's R&D or operations or commercial. But we all know that in a digital AI-driven world, that it's really about the end-to-end kind of multidisciplinary teams. And so getting more into deep collaboration, multidisciplinary teams, and building an IT organization that was ready for that kind of thought leadership and new work that needed to be done was another big part of that. So we kind of streamlined the IT organization, kind of restructured a bit. We automated or eliminated the work of 400 FTEs to be able to then really double down into deep either engineering or AI engineering capabilities. So making sure that we were flexing the organization to the future. And I think that's what's really allowed us to now be able to scale at the pace we're now scaling at, is those foundational elements. If you don't get them right in the beginning, it's very hard to then take advantage of the real opportunities that AI is bringing. So.
Again, great background. Thank you so much for that, Cindy. Diogo Rao, I wanted to turn to you. How is Eli Lilly using artificial intelligence to advance personalized medicine? And can you provide some specific examples of its impact?
Well, I don't think we're there for personalized medicine yet, although that is the dream. It is kind of crazy to think that medicine is still largely dispensed the same way that it was back in the 1950s. Comes in a little bottle, comes in 5 milligrams, 10 milligrams, 15 milligrams, whatever, and you take it once a day or once a week or whatever. None of that's really evolved yet, but the hope is that the dream is that it will get there, and we will be able to personalize medicine for you based on a variety of attributes, such as your gender, your age, your weight, things like that. But in the meanwhile, what we've done is brought in a lot of AI into our clinical trials. And it's been a lot of fun there because it turns out, when you hook up people with a bunch of sensors and you plug it into AI, you can discover some really amazing things and some great patterns. So even though we're not there yet for personalized medicine and actually what patients get in the end, we're starting to get there with clinical trials. One of our experiments here in the clinical trials and hooking people up with sensors, plugging it into AI, we decided to test people on COVID, or at least see if we could predict COVID from a variety of attributes. And it turns out we could predict that somebody was coming down with COVID before they ever tested positive for it based on a variety of attributes. And that's just like a very simple example of what you can do when you apply a bunch of sensors, such as heart rate, actigraphy, and things like that. So we're not there yet on personalized medicine, but that day will come.
Yeah, well, interesting to hear about the progress already made and some of the promises that perhaps, again, the foundation you're laying will provide for all of us. Terry, could I have you pull up the results of the poll, please? Let's check those out real quick before we continue this conversation. So how do you see AI impacting talent most significantly? Wow, a 62% saying increased productivity with new roles and org structures, about 19% and more skills-based work. rounding out the top three. Thank you so much for all who contributed to that, and very much, I think, aligned with some of what we're hearing across the conversations where this topic has arisen. I wanted to stick with you, Diogo, if I could. Can you talk about some of the challenges that you face down as an early adopter of AI and how you've addressed them? I mean, by being relatively early, in some cases, it's a little bit more difficult to say, well, there are others who are doing this and taking advantage of it. We'll learn from the mistakes of others and so on. How have you thought about overcoming perhaps some of what might be worry in being an early adopter?
Well, the biggest challenge I've had is my boss, our CEO, who's been an enthusiastic adopter of AI. So, I probably have a different set of challenges, perhaps, from a lot of companies out there. But, we've been very focused on how do we get AI out in the hands of many. So while a lot of companies were like, when ChatGPT hit the scene, said, wait, we're going to ban it. You can't use it. We took the opposite approach, which is how do we get everybody onto it safely? And it turns out adoption is a lot harder than anybody would ever guess. I run into more questions about risks of AI than what's your favorite prompt, or how are you using AI to make things better. And so I think the biggest challenge we really have, all of us, is just getting our entire workforce to embrace it. I think once they do, it's hard to give it up. We've piloted, in our case, we're a Microsoft shop, and so we've previewed Microsoft Copilot. We'll be rolling it out across our enterprise very soon. But our pilot group of about 800 folks or so, where you wouldn't be able to rip it away from them by the time they were done. It becomes such an integral part of what they do. Maybe a second thing I would put on that I think is going to be a challenge for all of us in terms of our workforce is that responding to AI or working with AI can sometimes be a different set of skills than the people that are in the roles today. And so one of the things I've noticed is we've implemented AI bots and things like that. The teams that are very excited about setting up the bots aren't always excited about maintaining the bots and training them and things like that. So I do think perhaps, take an analogy, lots of good firefighters out there, but not every good firefighter wants to be a fire inspector and write fire code, right? And it's a different skill set to train these models than it is to go out there and respond to incidents.
It's a great point, a great analogy, and also highlights throughout the answer the necessity of educating the populace, and ensuring that the organization understands its uses, as well as some of the changes that are afoot as a result of using solutions like the ones we're discussing. Greg, I wanted to turn back to you, if I may. BMS is leveraging generative AI specifically in drug development. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about the benefits you've seen so far, some of the things that have you excited about that work.
Yeah, I mean, drug development is another word for clinical trials, so I won't repeat what Diogo said, but definitely +1 on digital biomarkers, which is what he talked about. I'll instead kind of highlight two other areas. I mean, one of the biggest challenges in clinical trials is trying to find patients, especially if you're in sort of a specialty area like we are. Like, we have therapies for people that have like really highly specific genetic mutations in cancer, and so they're just not, people that are, around in abundance. And so the ability to reach in and grab data out of the clinical records that exist and try to figure out where potential patients like a ROS1 positive mutation in lung cancer would be, as an example. So the ability to do sort of patient matching, using AI tools to scan medical records has been, I think, really important for us in trying to find relatively small populations of patients. But I think I'll also sort of say that in the area of productivity, a lot of clinical trials it's mainly a process and paperwork. I mean, if you look at what it is you have like a really long set of documentation that explains how you're going to design your study. You have to make sure that the hundreds or thousands of independent sites are following to the exact letter what those standards are, and then you obviously have to collect information back from it to prove that what you said you would do. And a lot of that really is communicated through documentation. So the ability to generate documents has been really interesting. So we are using generative AI to generate novel documentation. A good example of this would be if we're getting ready to start a new trial, you're going to have all this criteria of what type of patient do you want to include and what do you want to exclude, because you don't want patients that have too many things going wrong with them, because you won't be able to isolate, whether or not the drug is having a specific effect or whether it's being confounded by other results. So the ability to create inclusion exclusion criteria that is just stringent enough where it passes the regulatory muster, but not overly stringent that you just sort of rule out, good patients that can benefit, is really important. And when you think about a company like ours, and we've done thousands of cardiovascular trials, and so the ability to take all the documentation for all those other trials and say, okay, we're going to start a new trial, go sort of find the efficient frontier of what we did in those other studies that worked, how much burden that puts on the patients if they have to come in every week for a scan, they're just not going to come in. So you're really sort of looking to learn sort of the collective learnings from all the other studies you've done in the therapeutic area. And then that kind of gives you, rather than starting with a blank Word document, which is where developing these new clinical study protocols start, you can really get a head start with a lot of the best practices of what worked in sort of previous studies. So it's like, this study looks a lot like these, and then being able to generate the documentation, which is sort of the median of all those other studies.
Yeah, very interesting. Again, thank you so much for sharing that example. Cindy, your generative AI research assistant has been deployed to, I think you told me, 15,000 scientists, leading to some improvements in your R&D processes. Can you talk a bit about that deployment, as well as some of the improvements you're seeing?
Sure. I mean, I think through technology, we're really looking to enable our scientists to leverage AI to advance our understanding of disease biology. And in R&D, we're typically asking two kind of key questions. So the first one is really about how can we make better decisions earlier? And then the second around how can we develop treatments faster? And so whether it's in early science or the literature research or submission approvals, we've really embedded AI across our value chain. And with generative AI, we've been able to create this research assistant, which kind of pulls together our knowledge graph, our scientific compute platform. It links with both internal and external kind of scientific as well as company information. And then using these RAG models, we've been able to accelerate the types of responses, and they're all cited. So high degree of efficacy in terms of where the information has come from, and how you can trust that information. And what we're seeing is that it's reduced our kind of literature research time from months to literally minutes, and just the ability to pull things together so seamlessly. And so we have rolled it out now, as you said, to over 15,000 colleagues. And I think we've been really impressed with its ability to kind of answer these high-end kind of complex scientific questions. And really what we're excited about is the scale and speed that we're now able to go at pace in terms of accelerating the generative AI equation. So we've got almost 80,000 employees on our internal chat GPT. We've got 15,000 on this research assistant and about 5,000 on Copilot. I was with one of our scientists yesterday, and they were just talking about the fact that, like, when they're not using Copilot, to your comment, Diogo, they feel naked. They're feeling like they're missing it. And I think that adoption and how you drive that is something that has been a big accelerator for us.
Can you also, Cindy, I know also you've talked about some of the other functions within the organization that have benefited dramatically. You talked about marketing technology, for instance, as an example of that. Can you talk about some of those internal use cases that particularly excite you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think one of the things we're seeing is just the content creation and the ability to start, drafting, whether it's submission documents or marketing materials. That's been amazing. And I think it never, you always have to have the person involved in making the ultimate decisions, but the ability to jumpstart so much of these activities, whether they're campaign launches or medical information, has been really profound. I think we're seeing this marrying of kind of what we call human ingenuity with the technology really leading to a better outcome. So similar to Diaz that was here earlier, we're not expecting that generative AI or AI in general will displace, mass amounts of people, but it's how do we use it as, instead of artificial intelligence, using it as augmented intelligence to really bring out the best work of the people that are looking to find treatments on behalf of patients. So yeah, it's been really spectacular.
That's really interesting.
Lots of downsides. We can also talk about that another time, but a lot of promise that we're seeing come to bear. So
that's wonderful. Greg, I wanted to ask you. You talked a bit about the the ways in which you're drawing information from patients, for example. You also are using generative AI to improve the company's ability to interact and answer questions for employees and healthcare professionals. Can you talk a bit about how you see capabilities evolving over time to impact the rest of the business?
Yeah, I mean, it gets back to a lot of the document Q&A stuff we talked about. So retrieval augmented generation is kind of the key points, but there's been some really interesting things. Like we'll receive thousands of calls a day from physicians or nurse practitioners, and they ask questions like, what is the optimal storage temperature of an unopened vial of nivolumab? Or they'll say, hey, can I cut, or am I allowed to split, or can I cut, or am I not allowed to do that to the Sotyktu tablet? And there are answers to those questions, and they're buried in a document somewhere. And so, typically we have very expensive MDs that are on the other end of that call center that receive, a note. Usually it's an SLA of like 48 hours to turn that around. And what we're finding here is that if you do enough fine tuning, you can really minimize the hallucinations, and you could eliminate the hallucinations honestly when you constrain the search space to documents that you trust. And so you can answer those questions immediately. Now, we would not at this point expose that directly to doctors. So what we're doing is we're exposing it to the people who answer those questions. And so they can basically do 20, 30 times the number of question answering, because they don't have to go find the document where that technical information exists and then go double check it and check with the lawyer and make sure they're allowed to say it. I mean, it's just kind of like a prefabricated answer that can just be generated. Similarly, that works internal as well. You think about, I'm sure everybody on this call has, thousands or tens of thousands of calls to the help desk. And those are questions that are, often pretty similar, like, got a new phone, how do I get my VPN on my phone? Or forgot my password to SAP, how do I reset those? And obviously we all have knowledge bases that we pay call centers somewhere and an operator to be able to answer them. Well, we find that a chatbot exposed to those knowledge bases, if they're constructed right, will actually do a way better job than most humans in answering those questions. So being able to sort of shift towards more of a self-service. We have all of the IT knowledge base. It's something like 80,000 documents ingested now, and then we're now moving on to HR, which are things like, where do I get my pay stub and my W-2 form, and these same kinds of things. Being able to move more towards a real self-service scenario, but it does depend upon you having a knowledge base that's well documented and longer form structure. It can't be shorthanded and things like that. But it's really, very nice productivity lift for really a combination of customer and employee self-service.
If I could just add to what
Please,
Greg was saying, we've got lots of applications for that. Actually, in this industry, as Cindy and Greg will relate to, we've got lots of policies because we're such a regulated industry, and tracking all the policies is and keeping track of everything in there is absolutely enormous. One of the discoveries we've had in creating bots for things like the kinds of use cases Greg is talking about is that for everything that has an official document, we need to have a companion, basically FAQ, frequently asked questions, that we use to update the model. Because a lot of the questions that Greg is talking about will be answered somewhat ambiguously, or at least perhaps not precisely enough in the source documents. And so when you have a representative or a human on the phone, they'll answer and give you a more specific answer. But it's not something that you would want to embed in the policy itself. Not to mention the fact that the policies generally require approvals by committees and things like that. So you wouldn't want to run every time somebody asks a question that's not exactly covered. You wouldn't want to go back and update your policy. So we've realized that it's important that every single bot that we put together that has some kind of an official document that it's trained on also needs to have a companion FAQ that can be updated without needing to go through some complicated approval process.
Very interesting examples, both Greg and Diogo. Thank you for those. Diogo, staying with you for a moment longer, if I may. I mentioned in the introduction that you came to Eli Lilly from Apple, and sort of a non-traditional pathway from Silicon Valley to Indianapolis, joining a 150-year-old pharmaceutical company. Talk a bit about what excited you in making this change and the methods you're using, and perhaps drawing upon your past experience to cultivate a technology mindset within an organization like yours.
Well, I didn't have any life sciences background before I got here, so it was a surprise for me. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I didn't realize how exciting it was. I mean, just like breakthrough after breakthrough in life sciences every single day, and then you add on what's happening with AI, and it's just the intersection of the two. I can't think of any place right now that's more exciting to be than the world that Cindy, Greg, and I are in. It is it's unbelievable. What I think gets lost or is not well known outside the industry is how much this industry, the medicines industry, is based on innovation. And so every single one of our products is based on patents, and those eventually go off patent. And if you look at the charts, they just basically go, revenue goes pretty close to zero. And I think pretty much all of our companies none of our companies are in the generics business. I don't think anyway. And so we don't really make money from that. So our entire portfolio is 100% based on innovation. We don't have some cash cow that's going to live on forever. And that pressure to innovate is absolutely enormous. I thought I knew about pressure to innovate coming from the tech world, but it's a different world. We can't just charge a subscription model in perpetuity for what we make. We have to go discover the next thing, and that's been both stressful, but it's also been incredibly exciting. And it also means that our partners are hugely enthusiastic of what we as technology folks can bring forward with AI.
So interesting. Well, I really appreciate the insights each of you have shared. Fascinating and very impactful innovations and remarkable stories to tell. And certainly the work that you and your teams are doing will have a broader impact on all of us. So thank you for the great work that you and your colleagues are doing. Diogo, Greg, Cindy, thank you for joining me, and thank you for a great conversation.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you very much.